start the recorder. Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining me for today's webinar. We'll be talking about composting and decompost and a small experiment I did with eggshells. I hope you know about composting. Can't go into too much details on it. I'll just show you a lot of pictures and maybe encourage you to do composting. It can be profitable in terms of getting the compost and save you a lot of money from buying compost, but at the same time it can be a lot of work. So if you do it right, things get easy. And what we're talking about today applies to the home gardener, even with one bin, to a small acreage grower, to a large commercial facility. The only difference is the size of the compost pile and the equipment needed to process it. Why do we compost? Well, I call compost as magic. You have sandy soil that doesn't hold water. It will retain the soil. You add compost, the soil will retain water and nutrients longer. You have clay soil that doesn't drain well. You add compost, and it will. If you can shut your video, please. Thank you. If you have clay soil that doesn't drain, you add compost, it will help it drain better. So it's like magic. It improves the soil texture, structure, all that. You can think of it as a slow release fertilizer too. And this is what happens in nature, really. If you think about the tropics with the lush greenery and trees and everything, the soil there is very poor. But there's a thick layer of leaves that drop every year, and they rot, and it rains all the time, and so that compost the tree leaves, after they compost, feed the tree back itself, kind of recycling the nutrient. So that's what happens in nature. In the home garden, if you compost, you can reduce your need to buy commercial fertilizer. Of course, it does not replace fertilizer. It's a slow release fertilizer, so you still have to add more fertilizer, but it's better than not having compost at all. And of course, it binds, it holds the fertilizer that you use longer, it holds the moisture that you're using longer, for all these benefits. And if you add enough compost, you will find that your soil pH does not change with time. It becomes stable. I've had soil tests done, and it stuck at 6.8 because I add compost all the time. So there is that advantage. It buffers the soil pH, which is beneficial for the plant. So fertilizers work. It's like a shot in the arm. The plant gets a quick amount of fertilizer that they need. When you add compost, you're supplying a variety of minerals, and you're also basically feeding the soil microorganisms and the soil life, like worms, nematodes, earthworms, the good kind of nematodes, not the root knot nematodes. All that will also feed the plant. So with compost, I always say you're feeding the soil, and then the soil feeds the plants. Okay, so you can think of compost as black gold. So here's an example advertisement by city. I took a picture of it. Wichita Falls. They were advertising saying that 1 cubic yard of compost saves you $207 worth of chemical fertilizer, $205 worth of humic acid, $150 in terms of dry molasses. So 1 cubic yard saves you $562. I don't know about these numbers. I've never done it myself, but it's not hard to believe. If you decide to compost, think ahead. How much compost do you need? And here's a quick formula. Measure each bed. If you measure the length, width, and the depth in inches, and you divide that by 324, that tells you how many cubic yards you need to compost or initially buy to get your garden started. So remember that formula. Or another formula, if you do everything in feet, length, width, and depth, if you divide that by 27, that will convert cubic feet to cubic yards. Okay. So usually commercial compost bags are sold in cubic yards. The one at box stores, they are sold in cubic feet. Make sure your bins for the composting are close to the beds, are out of the way, that they get plenty of sun, some shade, access to water, because you may need to add water in the dry summer so that your compost keeps cooking. All these considerations. You don't have a bin? Well, you can just make a pot and let it do its own thing. And this time of year, if you go to it, you can see steam coming out of it, and you know it's cooking. Of course, with this way, you're not turning it, so the inside is composting and the outside is still raw. So you have to sift it and then use the good quality compost, and the trash or the mulch that's not well composted yet, you can leave it behind and run it again through the compost pile. Okay, there's all kind of bins. Most people have one or two. Really, if you want to do it properly, you need three. One I call the storing, the filling station. Is like you fill with the new material. You never want to add new material to partially composted. One is just the filling station. The second one is what I'm calling the cooking station. That's the one that you don't add to it anymore. You just turn it and make sure it's cooking, getting the microorganisms doing their work. And the third bin is the one that's already finished product, what I call consumption station. It's already composted. That's where the one you use to refill. You put in pots and containers and the raised beds or whatever. Okay, so 3 is best. And ideally 3 by 3 by 3 is the best size. This way it's not too big, it's easy to turn, it's easy to handle. Larger are just too difficult unless you have a small tractor and you can move it from one bin to another. Some people have this idea of movable concrete bins, where you just move the bin from one square to another, and one is your filling station and one is your. So I mean, that's not bad, easy to move, cheap. The drawback is it does not hold much mulch, no more than. You don't want it to make it too big. Single barrel, the one that you buy and you rotate, they tell you turn, quarter turn every day. They're great, but the volume is small, and it's a great novelty, or it's great if you just need a small amount. But if you need a large amount, this will never work for you. Go to the 3-bin system, it's better. Some people just take a big roll of chicken wire or cattle panel, not chicken wire, and roll it and make a circle and they fill it. Well, that's great, but it's just too big and bulky, not durable, difficult to turn the material, difficult to cover. Animals can get in, and rats, mice can get in, hibernate in it, especially in the winter because it's warm. So the single pallet, that's I mean, that's easy to do. You can take 4 pallets, put them together, glue them or nail them together, and you have an instant. But remember, one is not enough. Unless you are you have enough material to fill it all at once and then turn it and consume it all at once. Then it will work. But if you put a couple of banana peels a day and a little bit of grass clipping here and there, that's not going to work for you. Plus, the wood from those pallets are not durable, and maybe in a year or 2 years they will rot, and then you have to rebuild a new one. This system is called the knee-high bin, where I don't know if these are 2x4 or 2x6s, or those, you stack them like you see in the picture here. Well, that's easy, and it provides great ventilation and durable, especially if you use treated wood. The disadvantage is you don't have a gate to turn it, so might as well just build something like that. 3 bins with a cover, so that you don't get too much rain. You want to add water, but you don't want it to get rained on all the time, because too much water is just as bad as too little water. The drawback is it's not portable. You may want to think of a place that it will stay there permanent. So here is an example of a good 3 bin with chicken wire on the side, so it gets great ventilation, and you can put a cover on top of it. Simple design, 3-gauge wire screen for plenty of circulation. The slats in the front are easily removable to allow easy access, and there's individual pieces, so they're not a big heavy door or a big heavy panel that is hard to remove. Okay, you can do something like this, what we call, it's a purchased, and they're called shepherd bin. It's durable, easily moved, has a central, I think you can see the central circle cylinder to provide good ventilation in the center. It's made by Mr. Shepherd, that's why it's called shepherd bin. But it can be expensive, about $50 plus tax and shipping, so might as well build your own. It's up to you. For any kind of composting, you need spade to turn. You need loppers or something, pruners to cut the material to small pieces, shredders. Because the smaller the piece of the raw material you put in, the faster it will compost. Okay. You can have a pail that you can, or a coffee container, to fill it with your kitchen scraps first, and then when it's full, you take it out. There's lots of ideas, and you can be creative on how to make it smooth and easy. Thermometer is nice, and there are thermometers made specifically for composting. They come with a 1 foot long or even longer probe, that needle of the thermometer, so that you can reach inside the composting bin to measure the temperature, because you want to reach about 165. If it gets too hot, you may want to turn it or mix the outside in so it doesn't cook too fast or too much. You need, of course, access to water, bucket or wheelbarrow to transport, and a screen. And I'll show you just to sift the compost, because if you want to wait for the compost to be 100% done, it's too much. You're wasting time. If it's 80% done, 70% done, fine, sift it, and the outside material that's not well composted, leave it behind to go through composting one more round. Briefly, what you compost is basically anything that's from a plant source. Okay, you can even put your coffee grounds for the paper filter that can compost. Plant brush debris, but again, the finer it is, the smaller that you shred it, the better. instead of just put a big twig or a big branch that you break it into small pieces. Well, that stick will be there a long time before it can compost. In terms of the brown material that you'll hear in composting, the green and the brown material, your dry grass clipping, egg clippings, your dry leaves, corn cobs, peanut hulls, pecan shells, if you can grind them to small pieces, newspaper, cardboard, if you can shred it to small pieces, all those is considered sources of carbon or the brown material. The beauty of adding your banana peels or your fruit peels is that they supplement nutrient minerals that the plant needs. Banana, orange peels give you potassium, bone meal if you buy it, which is not a bad idea to add because if you don't, it's not necessary. But bone meal adds more phosphorus. Eggshells, if you crush them or grind them, adds more calcium to the compost bin, so that the plant can benefit from it. Definitely do not add any animal waste. They may have parasites, it will smell. No dairy products, no leftover cooking oil, no bones from chicken bones from a meal. And if you want to get horse or cow manure, whatever, make sure you ask, was Grazon sprayed on that hay that was fed to those animals? Because Grazon, it's an herbicide applied in the field. It will survive the digestive tract of the animal. It will survive composting temperature, high temperatures, and then you try to grow tomatoes in it, and it will injure the plant. The plant will grow like if it has a virus on it, mutant and weird looking, and will never fruit. Okay. So for composting, you need the green and brown material, right? The one like I showed you, usually in your proportion 1/3 green to 2/3 brown. I've seen people do half and half, and that works fine. You need oxygen, so that's why you've seen in some of the pictures you need some air circulation so it doesn't become anaerobic composting. If your compost bin smells rotten or smells like rotten eggs, then it became anaerobic, and you need water so that it's kind of damp sponge consistency, not too wet and not too dry. Okay, so here's the cross-cut picture. You see one layer brown, one layer green, one layer brown, one layer green. Fill it, and after like a couple of weeks, turn it, and then wait another week and measure the temperature. And if you do everything right, in 3 weeks, it can be done. Maintaining the pile. I prefer you fill it as fast as possible, fill that station as fast as possible instead of a couple of peels here, half a bucket there, lettuce leaves there. Fill it as fast as possible. That's what I would recommend. Even if you mow your clipping, even if you have to take the leaf from your neighbor and whatever, fill it so it's done. Add water. Turn the pile every week, like I said, or every 2 weeks initially, and then it will shrink, of course, as it is composting. It will shrink. That's normal. Don't say, "Oh, it shrank. Let me add more." No, just leave it, and use pitchfork. Turn it either from one bin to another, or turn it in that same bin. Measure the temperature regularly. And when the temperature will spike, will reach around like 160, whatever, and then after a while the temperature will start dropping. When the temperature starts dropping and it looks like it's ready after you turn it, most likely it is ready. Okay. Water as you go. There's no specific rule on daily or weekly. We may get a lot of rain. You just remember you want that spongy consistency, not too wet. Like if you take a bunch and squeeze it and the water drips out of it, well, that's too wet, but you don't want it to be bone dry. Okay. And so the probe, you measure temperature, the probe tells you that, okay, it reached the temperature you want, which kills the pathogen, kills the weed seeds, controls some of the insect eggs, but at the same time it's breaking down the raw material at those high temperatures. And then when the temperature drops, you know that it's done. And you'll never have a finished compost 100%, like you see in this picture. If you sift it, you'll see there's a twig there, a couple of leaves there, a small branch, a root, whatever. But whatever goes through that sift, that screen, is ready to use, and then the leftovers, you put them back in the pile. Okay? This is what a nice finished compost should look like. You should not be able to recognize the original material that you put in. Like in this picture here, you don't see leaves, you don't see banana peel, you don't see orange peel. It's all broken down. It looks like a bag of compost that you bought from the store. Okay. Now, when it's done, maybe you spread it, give it time for the temperature to cool down, because it's still hot. It could still be 130, 140 Fahrenheit. You don't want to use it immediately. It's still hot. Give it a chance to cool down before you plant in it immediately. But we say let it rest and sit down for a few days to stabilize. You can use that compost as a lawn fertilizer. You spread 2 inches into the lawn and water it, and you can add it into your raised bed, and you cannot put enough. I mean, unlike chemical fertilizer, unlike animal manure, you can put 6 inches, you can put 8 inches of compost if it fits, and you're not going to hurt the plant by excessive mineral or burn it from, like if you put too much chemical fertilizer. And I recommend that you add compost each time you plant. So if you plant a garden 3 times a year, add compost as the last thing you do before planting. So remember this saying, the last thing you do before planting is add compost. Mulch is different than compost. Mulch is the raw material that goes into the composting. You put it on the soil surface. Oh, by the way, if you don't have plenty of raw material, green material from your kitchen to start your compost pile, just buy a whole bunch of mulch from your community, from the city, add some fertilizer, add some water, and it will start cooking. That's what commercial operations do. They get a lot of mulch, add lime to it, add some fertilizer, some water, and that's how commercial compost is made. They don't have enough access to leaves and lettuce leaves and banana peels, so you can use your mulch as a source of compost. A good friend of mine and a retired county agent, Mr. Bill Adams, used to say, the gardener with the most compost wins. I truly believe that, and I hope you believe that. If you don't want to make your own compost, just remember, the last thing you want to do before adding compost, before planting, is add compost. Some communities have a landfill. The city collects shredded trees that have fallen, and they shred them and they compost them, either sell them you as compost or sell them to you as mulch. A truck full like this sometimes costs you $10. It's very cheap. That's one source. Municipality, sometimes you can buy this. For example, look at this nice quality mulch that you can get all of this whole trailer full for about $10, depending on location. Leftover from your plant, from your garden, lettuce, broccoli, cabbage, like cauliflower, like in these pictures. After you harvest, you can take all those, shred them into the smallest pieces as you can with a spade or whatever, and put them in the compost pile. So the plant material from your garden should not be thrown away. They're a source of you can use your garden to compost directly. Like this material here you see in the picture on the right, the cabbage, or no, this looks like broccoli. If you shred it and bury it as small pieces as possible and bury it in the raised bed and rototill it in, it will rot and what we call green manure. So it's manure, but it's from plant source. So that's one way of doing that. And here's another way where you harvest and then you shred them to pieces and you rototill them. So in the picture on the left, the brown strip in the middle is the final stage after they have been shredded, cut to pieces, and rototilled in. And that's not toxic. You can plant immediately in it, even if it's not well rotten in the soil. It will slowly rot, and as they rot and compost, they feed the new plants. Trench composting, or what I call in-ground composting, is like, for example, what you see here in the picture on the left, the alleyway, we filled it with mulch and a little bit of fertilizer, and nature does its work, and a year later that mulch becomes compost. Of course, because it's an alleyway and you're walking on it and you're compacting it, we had to use a small rototiller to soften it, and then we put it on top of the raised bed. The mulch a year later became compost, and we dug it up, put it on top of the raised bed, and we refilled the alleyway with new layer of mulch for the next year. Okay, and here's this picture. You see the alleyway after we had dug up the compost and put it on the bed on the right side. You see it's a mound. Of course, we'll spread it and level it, and we can plant in it. And then you see what's in the trailer is a new layer of mulch that's going to go refill this trench for next year's compost source. If you decide to plant any bean crop after you harvest your peas, after you harvest your beans, chop them to smallest pieces and rototill them in. Because beans, I hope you know by now, beans and peas are nitrogen fixing plants. They fix their own nitrogen. So all that leaf material that you're going to throw away, just chop it, cut it to pieces, and let's say with a mower, if you want, chop it to smallest pieces possible, and then incorporate it. So the picture on the left is the same bed as the picture on the right, just from a different angle. After that fava bean have been chopped and rototilled, and looks like it's ready to plant the second crop. Peanuts is another source. You don't have to grow it. You can plant it thick. You don't have to grow it for a crop. You can plant them thick to grow it as a cover crop, and then chop it and incorporate it as a source of in-ground composting fertilizer for the next crop. Now remember, if you do the math and you get a soil test done, and they tell you you have 10% organic matter because we added all that compost. Well, 1% organic matter is the equivalent of adding 20 pounds of N per acre. That's a lot of fertilizer that you save just by adding 1% organic matter. Okay, and like I showed you in the few pictures I just passed, the cover crops for summer or fall planting are a great source of organic matter or a great source of green manure. Now let's switch. We're done with the composting. I visited a gardener in Midland, and I was impressed with his setup. He goes a step further. After he makes the composting, he makes his own compost tea, and he sent me pictures of how he does it. It's a great idea. Basically, he just builds a frame, covers it with plastic so it doesn't leak, and puts he puts the PVC at the bottom so that the water can drain and then in the PVC and come out from that corner. This corner here that you see in this picture, and it's kind of tilted. This picture doesn't show it, but it's tilted to slope down toward the bottom right corner where that scissor is, so that whenever water drains through it and water enters through these pipes, they drain towards that corner, and there's a bucket that he can collect that water. And of course, he put cardboard so it holds the compost in. It doesn't fall out from these big holes that he is using. You want to build something more permanent with wood, that will work, but this is easy to disassemble and store. Um, so that's why he had to put cardboard so that when he filled it with compost, it doesn't fall out from all these small holes. And then he runs water through it, and the water comes out, and you can see how dark the color of that water is in the bucket that's collecting the compost tea, if you want to call that compost tea. I mean, it looks very nutritious, so I took a sample of it and I tested it, and this picture shows you the mineral analysis. The column on the left is the clear water, and then on the right is the water that went through the compost material. pH is the same, electrical conductivity is the same, so it's not too salty, it's very good. Look at the nitrate. The water, rainwater that he collects at 13 parts per million minimal, that's negligible, doesn't count or not, but it's 2,000 parts per million in that from that compost water, and it's just simply running water through the compost pile. The potassium went from 3 to 1200, phosphorus went from 0.8 to 290. I told them this water is the compost water is too rich. You don't want 2,000 parts per million. That's diluted 10 times before you use it as a fertilizer for your garden. Now, it's a great fertilizer, it has NPK, but it may not have other minerals. Unfortunately, I did not measure the micronutrients. So it's a great idea. I recommend you do it, but don't think that test it, but it may not replace your balanced fertilizer that has all the micronutrients there. Let me show you some more pictures of a gardener I know, not far from where we are. He does composting the old-fashioned way. He just throws everything in a pile. He collects his leaves, he plant debris from his garden, all that. He just doesn't want, he has a small tractor that he can use it to fill or to take the finished product. So here's the tomato, debris from his raised beds. That's all that he shreds it and puts it in the compost pile. Okay, but because he's working with a large pile, and I convinced him that the smaller the pieces, the better, he bought a used what do you call that, branch shredder, leaf shredder, and he runs everything through it, like that pile of tomato dry plants. He runs them through it, breaks everything. So behind that shredder is the original pile, and on the right of it is the finished pile that has been shredded. You can see the difference, just how small that material is. You can imagine, and it does happen, that it's going to compost a lot faster because it's shredded to smaller pieces. So here he is filling the leaves that he collected from his woods, filling it and shredding it, and it's coming out from this end much finer pieces. You can see the temperature is 160 inside, and and remember, don't worry about the outside. Like you see a lot of big leaves, those will never compost because they're exposed to the air. Temperature are much cooler, but that's okay. I told you, even if 80% of it is done, leave the rest behind for the next pile. And this is the final product. Easy to use, just outdoors. Of course, what he was doing is he built his own little sieve, and he was doing it manually. And this is Mr. James Emery, a good friend of mine and a great gardener. And he was doing manually, and let me see, I hope you can see the video. He was doing it manually, fill it with a small bucket, to sift the material. I mean, here he's showing you, and then you see all that debris stays behind. Okay, so that's what you would call finished product, and this is what you would call unfinished product. That goes back to the bin. So I told them maybe I'm lazy. I told them, hey, let's find you a better system. So I told them build something bigger so it can hold more material. And I saw that he had an old swing set. I told him hang it from the swing set. This way you can fill it and then you can shake it. Less headache and less lifting, manual lifting. You just have to fill it. And of course, the compost material is light, so you can fill it all day, and you can put high enough that you can put the wheelbarrow below it, so it fills directly over the wheelbarrow, and that's how it looks when it was attached to the swing set. And I think I have video here somewhere. Okay, here's the video going from the. Of course, we're not using the wheelbarrow. We're just demonstrating how easy it is to lift, and you can work all day. This is some soil clumps that you can easily break, and the twigs and the big leaves that doesn't compost will go back in the compost pile. And the wheelbarrow is below it and ready to go to your raised bed. Okay? And here's the leftover. I guess this is about 10% of the whole amount that he got. And this is your final product. You can't go wrong with that. And here's the final product after I got a chance to get some rain, and it smelled earthy, smelled great. You can't, I mean, all his beds are filled with this material. He never had to buy compost from any outside source. Let's switch gears before we end and talk to you a little bit about eggshells. I remember my grandmother telling me in the old days before vitamins, pills were available, women were told to eat the eggshells because that's a great source of calcium, easily absorbable, and the eggshell has about 80% carbon source. So, and I thought, well, anyway, everybody's complaining about blossom end rot in tomatoes or pepper or squash, and we all eat eggs and we have source of eggshells. Why don't we have the same idea for the garden? So I bought some vinegar, white, red vinegar, that doesn't matter. I measured the pH of that vinegar. It was about 2. It's acidic, so pH of 2, that's very acidic. I have four eggs here. They weigh 20 grams. I crushed them. I should have crushed them a lot more. I should have dried them. If you want to do this, dry them in the oven so they're really bone dry, and put them in your blender or your coffee grinder so they are powder. I ground them as much as I could, but you can still see kind of big pieces. I put them in vinegar. The amount of vinegar, I mean, here there's a cup of vinegar and 4 eggshells. But what's funny, there's no cooking recipe that I can tell you because this was the initial trial that I did just to measure some things. But I figured that the 1 egg is the equivalent necessary amount of calcium for 1 tomato plant. You put 2 eggshells, it's not going to hurt the tomatoes, but when I did the math, I figured that 1 egg per plant is sufficient. And when you add it, you'll see it bubbling, it's foaming, because that's the vinegar reacting with the calcium carbonate in the eggshells and releasing CO2 and releasing the calcium. And then and you see the foam, and then after a day or two, the calcium settles at the bottom and there's no more reaction. And I think that one, I thought it was done. Remember, initial pH was 2, see it's becoming 4, and then later become 4.8, and next day was about 5, and I think the final pH was about 5.81 when I finished took the measurements. So I measured pH, calcium, potassium, nitrate, sodium, and look at the amount of calcium. Vinegar had 1 part per million, 5,300 parts per million, almost 0.5% of calcium in there. The H went up 5.8, so that's ready to use. You can pour it directly. You don't have to pour the vinegar out. No, you can pour it directly in the garden. It's not toxic. It went up from 1.5 to about 6, which is good. You release a lot of calcium, nitrate, that didn't change. Sodium went up. I guess the XLF is a little sodium, but 170 parts per million is not toxic to the plant, and you're not adding too much of it. So in other words, the bottom line from this is the calcium part. If you want to recycle, maybe that's one way you could do that with your eggshells. Dry them in the oven so they're brittle, or if you have a coffee grinder, or that's the best because you want to grind them to powder. The finer the piece, the more calcium you can extract from that shell. I bet you if I ground mine to smaller pieces than this, I would have extracted more calcium and use it in the garden. And I think this is my last slide. Where is the recorder? So we start recording, and if you have any